There we go. If I can click the right version of play, you would think I would know the triangle was play. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final Let's Talk About It women's suffrage discussion. Thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. I am Heather Register Zabindon, the Programs and Website Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art at the Central Arkansas Library System. After the program is over, a brief survey will appear in the window in your web browser. And Robin's nodding because she's like, yeah, I've heard this 5 times. Please take a minute to complete this survey for us. We need to report our findings back to our grant funders. Tonight, we will be discussing The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow. I'd like to thank the American Library Association and the National Endowment for the Humanities who have supported this project. Over the course of this 5-part series, we have been joined by women's history scholars, and tonight we are joined by project scholar Wendy Lucas of the of the University of Central Arkansas. It's that central part.
It's the central part.
Yeah. So UCA, University of Central Arkansas. Dr. Lucas is a Southern California native who received her PhD from the University of California at Riverside. An early Americanist by training, Dr. Lucas's main interests are material culture, identity, women, gender, and sexuality, and Native American European relations. She has published articles in Early American Studies, Quaker History, and the Journal of Early American History. Dr. Lucas is currently working on an article which uses quantitative analysis to examine testimonials and depositions during the Salem witch trials, which I didn't know about that. And that sounds, you're gonna have to tell us more about that. That sounds fascinating. This evening's session will start off with a short presentation, and then we'll start the book discussion. So if at any time, if you have problems, technical issues, that is, please feel free to message us and we will try to help you troubleshoot through the chat. So now, Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Okay. I have been laughing that you found probably the one person who does gender and witches. Like, this is such a weird Venn diagram that like there's got to be only 4 of us. So I'm glad that, you know, that someone realized there was a little Venn diagram in which we were the center. I appreciate that. I am a gender historian. I am an early Americanist, so I work on Salem. I teach a history of witchcraft class, which I'm actually currently teaching this semester. And I teach a class that really only focuses in on Salem. So what I want to start us off with is kind of 2 parts of a little bit of historical background knowledge. I want to talk to you about suffrage and the push for suffrage. And then I also want to talk to you a little bit about witchcraft, just because I think there's some things that having that background information will help kind of give us a little more things to hang the conversation on as we move through the book. So if at any time I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat, but please feel free to jump in. If you have a question, I'm happy to pause. I also can talk about this stuff for like 7,000 years. So if, you know, something happens and you're like, okay, don't let me get too far down a rabbit hole, Heather, like, be like, okay, we have to look, they have to come back to some other things. So because of course I can talk about this stuff for a zillion years. All right, let me see if I can't get this going. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint okay?
Yes, it looks perfect.
All right, I just want to, it's in full screen and I want to make it so I can see y'all a little bit better.
It may not let you.
Yeah, it's not gonna let me. That's okay. I pulled you closer. So now I'm not, now it's not so bad. Okay. All right. So like I said, I just want to give you a little bit of background. I'm gonna move us first through suffrage, and then I do, as I said, want to give you a little bit about some witchcraft things just so we've got them. So what I'm giving you is kind of the general the general kind of chain of events that gets us from the beginnings to the passage of the 19th Amendment. And so I'm just going to kind of hit the high points in the narrative so that you have some sense of how this happens. And I always start the story in 1840 with the World Anti-Slavery Convention. So there were, the 1800s were a time where you have, for the first time, a goodly cohort of educated women. It's kind of the first time in American history that that's happened. And these educated women don't really have a lot of opportunities, not a lot of jobs that are open to them. And so there's a real sense that what are they going to do with their education? They want to do more, they want to be more, but there's really limited opportunities. And so they really throw themselves into reform movements. And abolition is one of those reform movements. And so you start this story with a group of these women reformers. A lot of them are Quakers because Quaker women were used to public speaking. And so they are at ease doing this. And so they really jump in and be active with a lot of the early abolitionist movement. And so the picture on the right is the group of 12 Americans who were sent as the delegation to the World Anti-Slavery Convention. And in the front row with the kind of big wrap and the little bonnet is Lucretia Mott, who's probably the most famous Quaker female abolitionist in this period. And so they're there, they get there, and the women are told of this delegation that they are not going to be seated as delegates, but that they have to observe the proceedings basically from behind a curtain at the back of the room. And this makes Lucretia Mott irate because the other thing about Quakers is that they're very egalitarian. And so she's like, okay, this is not acceptable. And it turns out that she ends up spending her time not sitting as a delegate at this convention, but instead she meets the woman on the left, who is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was there on her honeymoon, because if you're a reformer in the 1800s, you honeymoon at the anti-slavery convention. And so the two of these women basically spend the time walking around London. And they have this important epiphany. And that epiphany is that what good does it do women to fight for rights for other people when they don't have any rights themselves? And women's historians really talk about this as being kind of a turning point. It's going to take these women and really have them have this realization that, yes, they still want to keep moving forward with all these other social movements they're doing, but they're going to add women's rights into that list of things that they care about. So they decide when they get home back at the US, they're going to organize the first women's rights convention so that they can spread the word about this and see what kind of activism they can get going around it. It takes them a little while. It doesn't happen until 1848, but it does happen. We call it the Seneca Falls Convention. It happens in Seneca Falls, New York. And there's about 200 people that are at this convention, men and women. And they talk about a lot of things, kind of what's the problems that women are facing. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton had written this Declaration of Sentiments. And I've given you the top of the text there so you can see it's modeled after the Declaration of Independence. And basically it outlined the things that they thought that women were being denied. They didn't have the right to most occupations, but they list a couple in particular. They don't have the rights to their own children after divorce. They don't have the right to their own wages. They can't own property. And the most controversial thing that's added into this Declaration of Sentiments is suffrage, that women should have the right to vote. And it's really interesting to me that here's this group of really radical people who are gathering to talk about these really radical ideas, and suffrage is what makes them go like, oh my gosh, how can that be? No, that's too far. So it tells you that in 1848, suffrage is still really seen as the most radical thing that they could come up with. Better to have your children after divorce than to have suffrage. So they're going to get it off the ground. They're talking about it. There's groups of women now that are starting to come together and think about what could this look like and how are they going to agitate for this. And it's still in Seneca Falls, although it's at a different meeting. It happens later. And actually, William Lloyd Garrison, another very famous abolitionist, is the man who's responsible for introducing them. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton meets another abolitionist, happens to be another Quaker woman. Her name is Susan B. Anthony. And they meet in 1851 and basically become immediate and lifelong friends. And they work really well together. Basically, they turn out to be this really powerhouse team. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton is the writer, and she can write a mean speech, but she doesn't like to speak in public, and she's married, she has children, she can't travel. Susan B. Anthony is an amazing public speaker, just amazing, and she never marries, so she's single, she can travel around. And so basically, Elizabeth Cady Stanton writes the speeches, Susan B. Anthony travels around and gives them. Several times she gets arrested for various things. It just happens that Stanton's husband is a lawyer, so that's nice. Your bestie can, send her husband down to get you out of jail if need be. So it's very convenient. So the two of them really spend the course of the rest of their lifetime pushing for their number one thing, which is suffrage. They've decided that that's their number one goal. They want suffrage for women. So an interesting thing happens at the tail end of the Civil War, and we get this break, this schism that happens, and it happens around these two amendments, the 14th and the 15th Amendments. So I put the verbiage up for both of these. 1866 is when Congress is starting to talk about a 14th Amendment. There's this radical Reconstruction. That's a long story. I'm not going to belabor you with it, but the initial verbiage of this amendment was going to include the word male. They were going to very explicitly say that men were going to be given the right to vote. If you don't know, you get your voting rights from the state, not the federal government. And so that's why this is needed. Freedmen after the war were being denied the right to vote. And so this is radical Republicans trying to ensure that basically ex-freed slaves, freedmen, were able to vote. So, and Stanton very sagely basically says, if we get that, if the word male is inserted, it's going to take us at least a century to get it out. Other reformer, Lucy Stone, said, no, it's the first step toward universal suffrage. So you're starting to see this beginning rift about what's the priority of suffrage. So you got this kind of one faction of reformers. Don't forget, they all start as abolitionists, right? One faction of these former abolitionists who are saying, no, the most important thing is to keep pushing for the pieces that went with abolition. Get slaves freed, give them the rights of citizenship, including the right to vote, and then we'll work on everything else later. Versus the Stanton and Anthony camp, which is, no, it's got to be suffrage for everybody. Otherwise, if they say men first, it's going to be forever before they give the women the right to vote. They don't want to give women the right to vote. And so we'll be so low down on the list, it's going to take forever. So that really coalesces then into two women's organizations. You have the National Women's Suffrage Association, which is founded in New York City in '69 by Stanton and Anthony. It's the more radical of these two women's groups. They refuse to have any political affiliation. And while their main agenda is suffrage, they're also talking about other issues that women had. In particular, they want to reform divorce rights so that women have more rights after divorce, and equal pay. And their membership was primarily women, and their officers were only women. Versus the competing organization, which is the American Women's Suffrage Association, also founded the same year, by people like Lucy Stone. Lucy Stone, most people don't know. She's kind of got a fun backstory. She's basically the first woman to keep her maiden name after marriage. So she's fun. The others are Julia Ward Howe, who wrote Battle Hymn of the Republic. That's her picture down on the bottom left, and Josephine Ruffin. This group was more conservative. They were absolutely tied to the Republican Party. They thought that the Republicans were going to be the way, basically make good political connections, convince the Republicans that they were going to get this block of loyal voters if the Republicans would give them the right to vote. So they absolutely connected themselves to the political party. They're only talking about suffrage. They actively sought male membership, and they had male officers. So it's a much more co-ed in that regard than the other group. So we've got these two competing structures that have basically been founded. The 14th Amendment has gone into effect. It didn't say the word men, but it's very clear that it's not yet giving the people the right to vote that the Congress intended to give the right to vote. So in 1870, they start talking again about another amendment. This one very explicitly trying to make sure that they're saying, you can't disenfranchise people. And the list they come up with that becomes the amendment is race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So they are very, again, specifically trying to make sure that they are enfranchising freedmen. Stanton and Anthony's group basically say, we will not throw our support behind this unless it includes the word sex. And their hope was that they could convince people to put sex into this amendment, which would have given essentially everybody the right to vote. Largely, we'll come back to the caveat of, does even the 19th Amendment enfranchise everyone? But, that we could get everybody in one fell swoop if we would add the word sex. The more conservative groups is convinced that if it includes the word sex, it won't pass. Freedmen are the most important. And they are convinced that Republicans are dedicated to helping women get the right to vote also. And so that the 16th Amendment, the very next time there's going to be an amendment, it's going to be to give women the right to vote, which of course they're wrong. It doesn't happen. I do want to mention to you briefly, there is an interesting court case, Minor versus Happersett in 1875. Women try for a little while to vote under the 15th Amendment. And most famously, Virginia Minor sues the registrar of voters in the state she lives in, I believe it's Missouri, because he won't let her register to vote. And she's basically saying, I'm a citizen. And if I'm a citizen, well, then you can't deny me the right to vote. And the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court and makes it there in 1875. And the US Supreme Court says, yes, women are citizens, but citizenship doesn't mean that you have voting rights. And so it's very clear then that that's not going to be the answer, that the only way that women are going to get the vote is if they have their own amendment. So Minor versus Happersett makes it clear they are going to need an amendment. So by 1890, you've seen this kind of reshuffling. It's very clear that the more conservative section got what they want, but they still haven't gotten suffrage. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony are getting old. And so we get this kind of, all right, let's come back together. Let's bring the two groups together. So we get one more big push to see if we can't get suffrage. And so they create, so cleverly, let's use everybody's pieces of their old organization title. So this is the National American Women's Suffrage Association, founded in 1890. It basically has, Anthony is the first president from 90 to 1900, and then it's got two more presidents, Carrie Chapman Catt, who's president for a little while, Anna Howard Shaw takes over, and then back to Carrie Chapman Catt. So when the amendment finally goes into effect, Carrie Chapman Catt is the president of that organization. And Catt's idea is they're going to do a state-by-state campaign. She thinks, forget the federal amendment. It's going to be too long to get the federal amendment. Women don't need the federal amendment because if the states decide who's going to vote, well, then the better thing to do is do state campaigns, go to each state, get those states to adopt suffrage. And so what you see on the bottom here is this map that's trying to show you, how quickly suffrage is being passed. And you'll notice mostly in the Western states. Western states really thought that this might be, they want people to move there. They thought this might be something that would get people to migrate to that area. There's not a lot of people out there. And so there's a real sense that this might be a motivation to do that. So So we've got this state by state campaign. Okay, I'm gonna take a drink of water. Into this then comes a more radical group of young people, young women who had studied abroad. They tended to be educated in the UK, and there was a real radical group of suffragist people in the UK who had been doing things like, there's a famous picture of a woman who is kind of wearing a Votes for Women sash and runs out in the middle of a horse race, and the king's horse tramples her and she dies. They were throwing bricks through windows. They're much more radical, much more guerrilla tactic, make a big scene, get arrested. That was good publicity. And so this group of women is much more in that vein. They think that's how you get stuff done. You need to be more radical. You can't assume that these Republicans are just going to give you what you want, that these men in power are just going to give you what you want. You've got to be radical. You've got to organize. And so the person we really highlight as the leader of this is Alice Paul, a woman named Alice Paul, who is going to break off from that Nassau group and create her own National Women's Party in 1913. But a couple of things happen here that really ramp this up. And the first is this Washington, March on Washington. So they decide that they're going to make a big spectacle by parading in protest at Woodrow Wilson's presidential inauguration. So president's supposed to come into town. Everybody's supposed to be focused on him. These suffragists decide, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to have this big parade. So 5,000 women parade. Nearly 500,000 people watched. At first, the parade is very peaceful, and then basically this riot ensues. If you are interested, it's a kind of old movie now, but it's called Iron-Jawed Angels, and it highlights this kind of final push by Alice Paul and these folks to get the right to vote, but they reenact this parade scene, and they do it really, really well. You see the woman on the horse. I mean, if you see any of the images that were taken at the time of this parade, they basically go through and almost scene for scene replicate them. So it's a really lovely thing to see if you want to watch what this would have looked like in a movie. So there's this near riot. The police basically don't do anything to protect the women. They end up being jailed. They are thrown into cells with prostitutes. Oh, I see a hand.
Sorry, what was the name of the movie?
Iron-Jawed Angels. Hilary Swank is Alice Paul in that movie, and Angelica Houston is Carrie Chapman Catt, and she does an excellent job as Carrie Chapman Catt.
And it's Iron what?
Iron-Jawed Angels.
Oh, Jaw. Okay, gotcha. Thanks. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we just put it in the chat too. I think
Daniel
just put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm not seeing the chat.
I can't see the chat either. So, okay, so this is big and loud, and President Wilson's not happy about this. 500 women, members of these General Federation of Women's Clubs, basically meet with Woodrow Wilson a little after this parade. They are kind of ushered into the East Room of the White House. And when the president comes in, they don't stand up, they don't applaud him, which he thinks is a great, it's disrespectful. He goes on and on about how disrespectful the women had been when they came to see him. So he kind of listens quietly while they give their grievances about what the things that they want the party to do for them. And basically he says, well, I appreciate it. I've heard you. I'm not going to tell you what I personally think about suffrage. And anyway, it's not my purview. It's for the states to decide. This is a states issue. I'm not going to get involved as president. And I want to read you a quote here, just because I think it really sums up what these more radical women are thinking at the time. So Lucy Burns, who works quite closely with Alice Paul in response to this, says, for a disenfranchised class seeking political freedom to be informed that they may not question the views of the ruler of their country on the matter of their own political status is really difficult to comprehend. And Alice Paul later remarked that Wilson had put his party on record as refusing to help the suffrage cause. The several million enfranchised women cannot fail to remember this fact in deciding upon their party affiliations next November. So if women got the right to vote, Alice Paul is basically saying we can't vote Republican because the party didn't care about us. There's a lot of concern about this, and certainly there are people in Nassau, that big organization, that this is only going to have hurt their cause. And in fact, Anna Howard Shaw actually wrote a note to President Wilson apologizing and basically saying that any act pushing for suffrage that was unlawful or disrespectful or not patriotic was that he should forgive because it didn't respond. It wasn't them. It was, outlier fringe and not them. But of course, Alice Paul doesn't think they've gone far enough, and so decides that the next tactic should be to picket the White House. And so starting in 1917, women start to just stand outside the White House with signs. They call them silent sentinels because they don't say anything. They are sometimes marching, but they are sometimes just standing out in front of the gates. Their signs, you can see some examples of what those look like here. They either ask things like, Mr. President, how long must we have to wait? They often use the president's own words against him. And so you see that in the top left corner, right out of his war messages, because of course we're in World War I. So right out of his, he's busy talking about democracy, how important democracy is, how we have to give voice to people in their government. And so women's suffrage activists are saying, this is ridiculous. You care about people in other countries having a voice in their country and being enfranchised, and yet here are all these women in your country who aren't enfranchised and you don't care. By the summer, Wilson is angry about this. It makes him look bad. They're picketing a wartime president, and the people in his cabinet start to say, okay, what can we do? How can we got to get rid of these women. How are we going to get rid of them? And so ultimately they decide to arrest them. And the charges are unlawful assembly, disorderly conduct, and disrupting traffic. So they're on the sidewalk, but they're disrupting traffic. And they're arrested, they are fined, but these women refuse to pay the fines. Basically, they're saying if we're not citizens and we're not, equal, then we're basically political prisoners. You can't eat your cake and have it, right? You can't fine us and treat us like we're part of this government and yet not part of the government. And so initially, judges are fairly lenient. Even if they refuse to pay the fine, they're like, okay, just go. But as the picketing continues, they start to put out harsher and harsher punishments. They send them to Occoquan Workhouse and the penitentiary in Loughton, Virginia. While there, Alice Paul is one of the people who is arrested while picketing and ends up in Occoquan, and decides to go on a hunger strike. I'm going to go forward and I'll come back again, but she goes on a hunger strike as a way to try to make the point that she's a political prisoner and being basically held for no reason. And she's not the first woman force-fed in American history. That's actually Margaret Sanger's sister, who was arrested for giving out birth control. But the accounts, she's able to get an account out of what happens here, and it really is horrific. Again, they show this, they dramatize it in the movie Iron-Jawed Angels, but they first basically start by force feeding her through her mouth, and then they do it so much that they can't put the tube down her anymore, and so then they start to put it down her nose. She throws up after every time. It's really horrific, the descriptions of what happens to her while she's being force-fed. Other women start to join in on this. Basically, everyone stops eating, and there's one night in particular, which the suffragists call the Night of Terror, and I'll go back to both Lucy Burns and this other woman. So there are 33 suffragists in Occoquan that night. It's November of 1917, and they were basically, some of them were beaten by the guards. They're thrown into cells. The woman in the picture on the bottom is thrown so hard that she hits her head against one of the back of the walls and basically is unconscious for a little while. A couple of them are chained with their hands above their heads and left all night long with their hands handcuffed to the bars above their heads. So really horrific treatment at the hands of the guards. And the Washington Post publishes her account of the treatment, and it's that really finally pressures Wilson into deciding that he's going to support suffrage. And so he gives a speech in December of 1917, and Wilson basically says the least tribute we can pay to them, to women, is to make them the equals of men in political rights, as they have proved themselves their equals in every field of practical work they have entered, whether for themselves or for their country. He talks about it as a war measure, that women had contributed so much to World War I that they should be rewarded with suffrage. The final, so, okay, now it has to be ratified by the states, right? We need a certain amount of states to say yes before it is in effect. And they're one vote short, and Tennessee is the next on the docket in August of 1920. We actually just had the anniversary, it's August 18th. August of 1920, it's on the rolls for Tennessee to vote to decide whether or not they're going to say yes or no to the 19th Amendment. And they had a couple of votes, and they voted twice before, and it had been no for the House both times. The Senate had said yes, but the House had said no. And they decided they're going to do one more vote. There'd been some issue about, were there enough people? Had there been enough Congress people on hand? And the great story is that there's a 24-year-old young man, his last name is Byrne, and he was going to vote no, but he gets a telegram from his mother that tells him to be a good boy and vote for suffrage, and he changes his vote. And so the vote in Tennessee passes by one vote. And that state then is the last state that's needed for ratification of the 19th Amendment. So finally, then women do get the right to vote. And you can see there's Alice Paul. They've been making this banner, and as every state said yes, they've been adding stars to this banner. And so this is her like, yay, it's a success. We finally have enough to make it possible. The one thing I always tell students, and I do wanted to make sure I would tell you, is that neither Stanton nor Anthony lived to see the passage of this amendment. And only 2 of the 100 women who were there in 1848 that signed the Declaration of Sentiments lived to see its passage. And so most of the people who start this fight for suffrage, when we started this conversation, only 2 of them were alive to see it. So in that regard, it's one of these where it's kind of sad that the people who'd been fighting so hard didn't get to see the results of all their work. And I do want to point out, and I always tell students, you know, if we're not careful, we generalize too much, and we say, you know, this gives women the right to vote. Well, not really. Chinese American women couldn't vote until 1943. Black women couldn't vote in the South until 1965. I've said a woman convicted of a felony still can't vote today in 9 states. There's so much that's being done on voter suppression that it's very clear that there are still a lot of women today, not just women, but women included, who are being disenfranchised by voter suppression. And so I put the link to that Brennan Center if you're curious about the people who are doing work and documenting voter suppression, that you can see some more information about that. So, okay, so before I switch gears and we talk about witches, did you have any questions or anything you wanted to ask before I segue? Oh,
I think you're, oh yeah, Shannon raised her hand.
okay.
Do I put this in chat or just?
You can ask.
My basic question is, why were they okay with freedmen getting the vote and not women? I mean, because it's going to benefit them in some way, or they wouldn't have allowed it. But how was it that, I mean, that they feared women so much, even at that point, to take that?
It's a couple of things. There is a real sense that a lot of, I mean, it's not like there's no racism in this period, right? So
Right.
there are a group of people, a lot of them, frankly, in this period who didn't really want Black men to vote, certainly didn't want Black women to vote. And so there's a way in which that you think like, okay, well, they might have given the vote to these elite educated white women, but they didn't want to include anybody else, right? There is this ugly racist component there. There's definitely a sense that women didn't need the right to vote, that a husband casting a vote was casting a vote for the family. And there was some concern because there had already been women voting in the West, that it turns out women had been swing votes in some of those states. And so they didn't want for women to be the deciding vote if men were divided, and then let women decide essentially who was going to be in charge. And so I think that those things all really contribute to how they're going to, how they think about that. I think it's both racism and a very, you know, oh, women don't need it, men take care of them. Forget that there were single women or, you know, any of these people. It's like, if you didn't fit the norm was you had a man. And so you didn't need this if you had a male breadwinner that was going to vote for your family's welfare. Anything else? Anything else in chat I didn't get, Heather? Because I can't see it.
No, you're good.
Okay. Okay, so let me give us just a little bit about witchcraft, just again, just because I want to stick some of this in your head before we have the conversation. So when I talk to students about this, I always say, you know, I think it's really easy to discount so much of this because it's not a world that we live in. We think that we're so far from these people and that we just don't occupy the world that they live in. And so I always say, you know, we have to situate ourselves in the early modern mindset. And so it's things like, you know, they believe in the four humors. They absolutely think that these four humors are at work in your body, and that if you're sick, it's just that one of these humors are out of alignment. And if they can just, you know, bleed you, they're going to get your humors back into alignment and you're going to be fine. They live in fear. They, you know, think about the darkest place you've ever been in Arkansas at night, and all you have is this little lantern to see into, and there's animals and Indians and all these things, if you're in the US. And so there's things that they fear, that they can't, that makes them feel afraid all the time. There are things they can't control. They can't control illness. And so they're just anxious all the time. And their explanation for everything is supernatural. It's either God, or it's a demon, or witches, or the devil. That's their go-to. You know, it's not that there's a disease or a germ. It's not that there's, you know, an eclipse. It's not that there's a little ice age. It's got to be that God's punishing them, or God's rewarding them, or there's demons. And the last thing is that I think we forget this because it's just natural to us, but you know, our brains are so powerful. They like patterns over random things. And so if we can look for a pattern and try to find a pattern, we're always going to privilege the pattern over the random. The simplest answer rings the most true to us. So if the simplest answer is that your neighbor is a witch that's causing your misfortune, that's easy. We're storytellers. We fill in the gaps. And you know, in the absence of information, our brain's going to take other information that it has and fill in those gaps. So you can see that over and over and over again. And negatives outweigh the positives. We're always going to remember the negative. Those are going to stick with us over the positives. Really quickly, they believed in 4 kinds of folk magic: divination, basically tell the future or find lost items; healing magic, what it sounds like, although it's often like legitimate healing remedies combined with some kinds of spells and herbs to try to make you well; destroying magic, which is basically voodoo dolls; and then counter magic, which is a way you can reverse a spell. You basically take hair, blood, or urine from the afflicted person or animal, burn it. And when you do that, it puts the spell back on the witch who cast it. So it's a way you can undo the magic. We think of women as the primary group of people who are witches. The word witch is actually not gender specific in most countries in the early modern period. It just means wise. There were groups of people called cunning folk who had special knowledge of herbs and magic, and they were cunning folk. They were valued. They were really wonderful to have in a community. So we don't start to think about woman equals witch, right? That a witch is a woman as opposed to necessarily a man until the Malleus Maleficarum. And the Malleus Maleficarum literally means hammer of witches. And it's the initial kind of witch hunter's manual. It outlines a witch's power, how to elicit a confession. It really is the reason that people start to think about women as witches. If you ever want a good laugh, there's some great things in the Malleus Maleficarum that are just hysterical. I will quickly tell you my favorite is that they thought that witches kept men's penises in nests in trees. And there's a hilarious story about a guy who wants his penis back. So he goes to the witch to ask for it. And she says, fine, it's up in this tree. And he tries to take the biggest one. And she says, you can't take that one. It belongs to the local minister. So that's the kind of stuff that's in this Malleus Maleficarum. It's a cackle. You should take a peek sometime when you are bored. Okay, so just demographically, like who tended to be the average witch? In Europe, it's 75% of the people who were accused. In the US, it's 80% of the people accused. The church absolutely said that women were a necessary evil. They were more predisposed to be evil. They don't understand menstruation. They think that when women are menstruating, they're more open to the influence of the devil. So, you need them for procreation, but men marry them and like sleep with an eye open because they're, up to evil and no good all the time. They tend to be postmenopausal, so they aren't childbearing age anymore, so they don't have any use in this society. But as I often say to students too, the older you get, the more outspoken you are, the less differential you are. You've been alive a long time, right? You're like, I don't care, I'm gonna tell this governor he's wrong, but I'm older than he is. I remember when he was a little kid walking around with snot in his nose, and so I don't care, I'm gonna tell him he's wrong, that kind of thing, right? So they're not differential, they're outspoken. They've been often suspected for years. I always say this is not the person that when I tell you they've been accused that you're like, no, she's so sweet. She makes cookies and she's so lovely. This is the person you're like, oh my gosh, I've known since 1620 that woman was a witch. Did I ever tell you about the time? And you have your own long list of the like 7 things that are your pieces of evidence, right? So been suspected for years. Marital status. These are people who are widowed. By and large, widowed. If you get accused and you have a father, a husband, a grown son who will come down and be like, oh, she's a problem. I know, I'm sorry. I promise she'll behave better in the future. I'll make sure of it. You might get accused, but you're not going to get convicted. But often these women get, as soon as the husband dies, they get accused again. This time they get convicted and executed. So marital status makes a difference. If you don't have a man to come forward, you're in trouble. Economic status, they're either very rich or very poor. Those are the 2 extremes. Basically nobody in the middle. These women who are accused are either very rich or very poor. Men are 92% of the accused in Iceland and the majority in Russia, the minority in every place else, but in these 2 places, they're the most. But you do get men accused as part of a large panic. So you start to get an outbreak of 100 people accused, for example, you're going to get men. They tend to be related to a female witch. They live in areas where witchcraft equals heresy. So we've kind of broadened the scope of who's looking for witches and why they think witchcraft is terrible. And then certain occupations were more vulnerable. Tended to be blacksmiths, shepherds, executioners, and clerics, interestingly. So one last thing here. I know I know we need to start talking about the book. I'll let you kind of look through this. There is a difference. They think there's a difference between men's magic and women's magic. And I put this up because you see some of this in the book, and this may be the place that we start our conversation. But there's definitely a sense that men's magic was more potent. It always works. It's used for business. It's written spells. If there are body parts that are used, they're more exotic body parts. You have to like go to the hangman to get them. And often seen as like, okay, we're sorry that you used it, but you were using it for good. You were trying to increase your harvest. You were trying to heal livestock, etc. Women's magic is seen as less potent. They often talk about it like cooking, the same way that cooking doesn't always turn out the way you want. Women's magic didn't always turn out right. It could go awry. It's most often used for things like love spells or healing, or what I've kind of dubbed women's issues, right? So, how to get or get rid of a pregnancy, how to do things like your butter. You're trying to churn butter, it's not turning. So what are you going to do to get the butter to churn the way it's supposed to? It's more oral, so it's spoken spells. If they're going to use body parts, it's stuff that they have easy access to. Things like milk and blood. Think about all the things that would be available if you were part of a birthing. So the kinds of things that women have access to. And then most often seen as using magic for ill. They're trying to kill people or animals, or again, steal men's penises. You can see there's a big preoccupation about this, make men fall in love with them, etc. So that's that kind of women's magic, men's magic. So I'm going to stop this. I can always jump in and talk more about Salem if you have specific questions. But mostly I wanted to give you just some grounding there for us to talk about some other stuff. So anything else before we jump in? Any other questions? I hope that wasn't too much, but enough that you feel like, okay, I've got some stuff in my head now.
That was perfect. Thank
Good.
you.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the book. Here's the book. So where do we want to get started? Does anybody have any thoughts?
I have all the thoughts, but I'm gonna be quiet here for a second.
You can have thoughts. You can have thoughts too.
Let's start with that men's magic, women's magic, right? There is a very clear sense that men's magic and women's magic is different in this book. And I just wondered what you thought about that, how that struck you, how, if you, that shifts, right? It's by the end, it kind of shifts, but there is this real clear moment early on that men's magic and women's magic is different. And I wondered what you thought about that and the evolution of that as the book went on.
Anybody? Because I'll just talk.
To me, this is very much, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, whether it's voting or witchcraft or whatever. So.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting how early on in the book, the father, there's this grandmother figure, right? That's going to teach them, that's going to show them things. And then there's the father who is not about it at all. I
thought it was interesting that initially there isn't a sense that men do magic. Then it turns out there is this men's magic. And again, it breaks the machines, right? It's like, it's tied to business and industry and that kind of thing. And so I was just, I was struck that she kind of modeled that same men's magic, women's magic. And I thought it was really interesting by the end that they can use each other's magic, right? That it turns out there isn't men's magic and women's magic. And so I thought that was an interesting take that she's got toward the end of this.
I also think it's interesting that, I feel like the women felt like they had to do this out in the open and build this collective around it and bring attention to themselves just to get enough of them together to do something, whereas the men played in the shadows throughout basically the entire book until kind of the bigger reveal at the end. And I feel like that's kind of reminiscent of political movement too. I feel like women in political spheres like tend to be more grandiose. Like if someone's kept in prison and tortured, they're going to write about it to bring attention to it, because like something has to happen to women for somebody to pay attention, but men can just move in the shadows. Like I feel like that seems like a very like, and even, you know, in modern political times, I feel like, you know, like whenever you think about progressive women's activism, it's much more big and out there, whereas like kind of subversive, like right-wing activity kind of happens in the shadows, or like kind of right in front of you in a way that isn't as obvious, I guess. That was something I kind of saw like through the book.
This idea of a collective of women too, Danielle, you get me thinking about this, right? It's like, you know, in the period I study, that was real easy for women because there's all these events where, right, like we would all have been attending birthings, right? I mean, you would have, as when you were a young kid, there was this kind of community of women that came together around women's issues, and they would have had these conversations. And then as modernization happens and we pull farther apart, that we don't have this kind of built-in moments of community. And so I think part of what happens and why we get these big spectacles then is because women have to come out, right? I have to come out and find you to say, hey, do you agree with me? Let's be part of this community, because we don't have these moments where we're automatically together anymore to do that. So.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of like demonstrated at the beginning of the book too, when the sisters are separated, like how they're kind of forced together because that's the only way something's going to happen. Yeah, I just felt like that was something that was sort of like repeated throughout the book.
Yeah. And that they are more powerful together, clearly. Yeah.
Well, and the whole idea of maiden, mother, crone, and we've got the three sisters. The, you know, three always shows up in so many ways, right? In women's, you know, in Christianity and women's things and all kinds, you know, three is a big number. And
those are the three stages of women, right? You are young, you are maiden, you are mother, you are crone, right? There's no other really archetypal roles for women.
Right.
I do like that she kind of made a concerted effort to, even though they had these kind of assigned roles, like they didn't really quite fit them in the way that it would have been easier, I think, to put them in those categories. Like, I think that they still were sort of like women out of their time a little bit. Probably not truly, but like the way you think about women of their time.
The lost three or the three main characters in the book?
The three main characters.
The three main characters, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody else had trouble with this. I had trouble keeping three straight, like who was who. I almost wish I had like, I'm such a visual person, like a picture of each of them in the front of the book, some kind of, even just kind of random artist, you know, so I could be like, oh, okay, that's that person and that's that person. Now, where did you find that?
So the publisher has a book club conversation PDF that's got all this information in it, like a little blurb from the author and a timeline and her like, hey, there's hidden Easter eggs, but it has this drawing in it. And I was like, that's really cool.
I wish they had put that in the book.
I know.
Because I listened to it. I mean, I had my book with me, but I was listening to the audiobook, and there were times where I was like, okay, wait a second, which one is that? Because I should not listen to audiobooks, but I needed to do it so that I could, you know, but I wish I'd known that. I could have done a little bit more research, I guess.
She's got some interesting things here. I'll tell you some of the stuff that are in her questions. So she says there are 7 retold fairy tales in this book, all of them significantly altered from their familiar versions. How were they altered and why? How do they complement the central story? Which I had to think about. I was like, oh, wait, that's true. But it wouldn't have come to me if she hadn't highlighted it. Maiden, mother, crone are traditional figures in Western folklore mythology. In what ways do Jennifer, Agnes, and Bella fulfill or subvert their archetypal roles? What about the last 3? I really liked this one. The return of magic is a classic trope in fantasy fiction, usually accomplished by a prophesied hero or a grand spell. Restoring witchcraft is a little more difficult with the Sisters of Avalon. What setbacks do they encounter? Why are those challenges significant in a thematic sense? I thought that one was good. And then she talks about historical Easter eggs. So she tells you like, here are places that are true. Maybe they're slightly altered, but these things really did happen. And as the historian, I was replete like, oh, she's played with that person's name. Oh, it's this person, right? So I think that there is a lot of that in this book.
Yeah, I'm reading through this now. I just found it. And the only one I caught was the Wells character. I didn't
Oh, yeah.
the other ones. So
Victoria Woodhull, right? There's the two sisters. She says, my book is flagged with all of the, oh, look, oh, look, oh,
Oh,
look.
yeah. Very professorial.
Here's this person. Here's that.
Yes. I didn't get a chance to really look this up, but I did wonder when we first were given the list, I did, when I was in college, I took Arthurian literature and, T.H. White's Once and Future King and Once and Future Witches and the Avalon. I mean, those connections, I found that really interesting. And I would like to know from her more where she
got
where
that.
she sparked that, right?
I wonder if she says it in this little blurb here where she says what she took.
Robin put in the chat, early on, I expected that Juniper might turn out to be the crone. She's much more aggressive than I imagined a traditional blushing maiden to be.
She is crotchety, right? I mean, she's just funky and, yes, I agree with that. She doesn't mention Avalon in here, so I don't know. Maybe. Well, that's an interesting. You're gonna have to Google that and let me know what the answer is.
Danielle, why don't you DM her?
Why don't I bother this woman again?
Danielle DM'd her and asked her to join us tonight. So
I regularly.
One thing
DM
I
her.
will say,
I bother her all the time. So
the only thing that infuriated me as the historian who studies this more than anything is it's several times in here about, oh, they're going to burn us. They burned us. They burned us. And of course, there are no burnings of women in Salem because we follow English law. We only hang witches. And so every time she said burn, I was like, no, stop. Don't say it. Say hanging. But it's okay.
The French burn, right?
Everybody except England and then us burn.
Okay.
Yeah. Germany, Switzerland, everybody else burns.
Yeah.
I guess it's more of a graphic imagining than a hanging to say.
Well, and I think most people don't realize that there's hanging. So if they'd said hanging, people would have been like, well, she's crazy. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah, I think if you polled people, they would go, burning a witch at the stake, right? That's the visual we get.
And I'm really curious about the 7 fairy tales. Because, well, she has like 2 books that she's written more recently. They're novellas that are modern retellings of fairy tales. And so I guess maybe she started playing with it in this book, but it didn't stick with me, I guess. I don't really remember.
Yeah, I didn't remember either. I mean, as I was flipping back through thinking about it before tonight, some of the headings say it's clear, right? They're nodding at some of that, like it's, Rapunzel or something, she's making very clear that's what it is, but I just hadn't stuck with me that was what she was doing.
Yeah.
Naomi Novik also plays with retelling of fairy tales. Yeah, so here's on 115, the tale of Rapunzel and the crone. So she's got a couple of these little, just like 1-page inserts before our next chapter happens where you tend to get them. And
I liked how she uses the, 1 for sorrow, 1 for mirth, 3 for funeral. Those kind of rhymes, there's rhymes sometimes that we learn, and it's like, I think for some of us wanting to believe in magic, that it's, oh, wow, those are that's the way you're learning your spells, right? You make it a
Mhm.
little rhyme so that it'll stick with you. And you read things like Discovery of Witches, and if you haven't read Discovery of Witches, it's a trilogy and it's fabulous.
Also written by a historian.
Also written by a historian. And there's a TV show and it's really good too, but read the books first. So yeah, you have, she has these little things that character remembers. She didn't realize she was learning magic at the time, and so yeah, I think we see that storyline continuing over and over again in modern tellings. So
it was also what made me think about women's magic and men's magic, because they're almost nonsensical, right? So someone could hear you saying this kind of nonsensical gibberish children's rhyme and not realize that you were doing magic.
Right.
So that was what made me think, oh, she's playing with it. That's kind of clever. I like that.
Well, this was great, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part. If does anybody have any other last thoughts, last comments? Y'all are a quiet group.
I know.
That's okay. And I think Robin gets the prize. She's been here every month. I think she's the only one that's come every time. So thank you, Robin. Thank you everybody for being here. And my computer has decided to hide my closing notes, so I'm stalling, trying to make it reopen them. Did I mention at the beginning that earlier my computer was acting really weird, and I actually said to it, "Stop doing what I'm not asking you to do." Maybe there's magic involved.
I've got two things to say.
Yes.
Two things for my favorite lines from the book.
Yes.
And I've just got my notes from Kindle. The first one was from chapter 37. Agnes isn't surprised, not really. She knows powerful men only keep their promises when they have to, and they never have to. And the second one was behind every witch is a woman wronged. And I like those lines a lot.
I've got a couple I really love. I have Bet the bastards wish they'd just given us the vote when we asked nicely, says elected Gage, with no small degree of dissatisfaction. Too late now.
Yeah.
And then magic is really interesting in this book, and the way magic works as a system. I'm always interested in how people think about magic when they write about it. And so she says, the crone, so kind of talking about the crone is talking about magic, and she says, if you three were chosen, it was by circumstance, by your own need. That's all magic is, really, the space between what you have and what you need, which I thought was very, I liked that. And then I love toward the end when they're having essentially the trial for Bella, and there's no cross-examination, no defense. This is a witch trial after all, and witches have even fewer rights than women. Yes. So,
well, and you're right about the need, magic coming when you need it. That's a reoccurring theme through books and television shows. Magic will appear when you need it, when the right three people are put together. So
they weren't using magic to overthrow and squash the men. This wasn't a oppression, suppression, or anything. It was just put us on the same playing field. And like I said, I mean, this book just resonated because the more things change, the more they stay the same.
But also a moment of intersectionality, right? It's only when women come together that they're going, and all women come together, right? So, you need the folks in, New Clio to come too, right? It's not just white women. We need Black women. We need all the people. We have to have this intersectionality come together, because women as a group have to be a force. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
The more oppressed need a bigger voice.
Yeah. You need somebody, almost always what you need is somebody who's got power to say, I'm willing to help give you power, right? So if you can find those alliances, you'll be more and more successful.
And that's so true in everyday life, right?
That's true.
I mean, you know, it's important to find those mentors that can help you. So,
Yeah. Anybody else have a line that jumped out? Now I'm just curious. We got a little bit of time left. Anybody else have a good quote that they highlighted that they loved?
I looked on my Kindle, but I guess the notes were gone.
Oh,
I haven't read it in a long time, so I didn't remember anything off the top of my head, but I looked to see if I had highlighted anything, but it was a library loan, so I guess they took it back when they did it.
they took
They
back your
did.
notes?
They took back,
yeah,
I guess.
That makes me sad.
that ought to give you at least an option to download them.
I know. We
Yeah,
need to
You
speak
should
with
talk
someone
to
about
somebody
this.
at your local library and
I'll do
talk
that.
about that. Yeah. There were several times, I can't remember one off the top of my head, but like I said, I was listening to it on an audiobook and I had earbuds in and I was walking around the house cleaning as you do. And I laughed out loud and my kid, my 14-year-old, just kind of looked at me like, what is going on with you? I guess he assumed I was listening to music. And I was like, no, I'm listening to a book. Yeah. So
Nobody else has quotes? Okay.
Did you find your closing notes, Heather?
I did.
Okay,
I
good.
did. They produced themselves.
Good.
They appeared out of the background. So well, thank you, Wendy, for doing this. This was great. This was a great closing to this program. I've had a lot of fun doing this book club. I think I told somebody early on, I had been trying to figure out a way to do some kind, and most of the books were nonfiction, do some kind of nonfiction book club. And I hadn't really, hit upon it. And this grant just seemed like the perfect thing. So I will thank the American Library Association and then National Endowment for the Humanities, who are always supporting all kinds of awesome programs at our local library and others. So please take the survey that will appear in your browser window when you close out the Zoom. It's just 7 questions, but it'll help us report back to them. And if you are interested in other programs like this, the Central Arkansas Library System has hundreds of programs every month that we do for all ages. Just go to cals.org. And if you're specifically interested in genealogy or Arkansas history, you can go to robertslibrary.org. That's where our programs are listed. And Danielle and I work there. So thank you again, Wendy. Thank you, Danielle, for being. Thank you, everybody else for being here. This has been a lot of fun. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you, everybody. It was a really good talk.
It was nice to see everybody. I hope we'll all run into each other again somewhere.
Everybody have a great
This is my
evening.
first book club
Oh,
ever. So
Well, I will tell you, Shannon, right? Yeah, I'll tell you, Shannon, that the library system has book clubs I don't know if you're here in Little Rock, but we have book clubs all over town at all of our branches. So check it out. And some of them have different themes. I just went blank on, I have, but I just went blank. So check one out because they're really cool.
okay.
with varying levels of conversation ahead of the discussion of the book, right? So
Yes. So I think most of the book clubs are just simply, you read the book and you
Discussion.
go in and you discuss it as a group. And I know during COVID, a lot of them did not work well virtually. And so they kind of abandoned it for the COVID time. And then I know COVID's not completely open, but over, but we're open, ready for business. So, so yeah, there's one, I know there's one at Thompson. I think Terry has a couple, so they're all over town. So just go to cals.org and look for book clubs. So yeah, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.